Okay, hello. In this video, we're going to touch upon the reforms of Great Britain. As a reminder, this will be an assignment where you're going to basically need to take some notes on this PowerPoint slide that will be an assignment in classroom. There's also the French Revolution on there, which you may get to in a video or may touch upon we may do in class. Some of these we've discussed, but some of these we have not discussed. Some of these aspects of British reform we've discussed in class, but some, again, will be a little bit new. So a little bit of review and a little bit of new. So let's get rolling here. Let's start from going back and just kind of touching upon what got us here. So the effects of the Industrial Revolution, bringing wealth and power to Great Britain. They were the power. Manufacturing half the world's cotton, 2/3 of the world's coal. I should say coal, not cool. 1/2 of the world's iron, 1/3 of the world's trade. So if some of these were blank in your notes, please fill them in. The outcome of that being that there was an economic and social inequality with business owners getting a lot of wages or owning a lot of the factors of production, the capitalism, resulting in low wages, high hours for the working class, as we've talked about during the Industrial Revolution. And there was a call for reforms or a rise of liberalism in politics. And that liberalism was the support of government protection and individual rights and civil liberties. That was, liberal ideas. But the problem, majorly, the obstacle was that the House of Commons was not representing the British people. Only wealthy men could vote who own property. No surprise that only wealthy landowners elected to the House of Commons. So representative districts did not reflect the population change. So then the solution would then need to be reforms. Now these reforms we've talked about some of these in class. Reform Bill of 1832, which basically in the Factory Act of 1833, and Chartist movements, Corn Laws, which repealed the Corn Laws, which basically would repeal. Excuse me, let me come back here. I'm going to put this on show for a second. The Reform Bill, which basically changed the House of Commons so that it would reflect population change in Britain. Basically, now the middle class and working class would have a greater voice in government. Excuse me. Factory of 1833. Remember, we did this chart in class, and the Factory Act basically limited the amount of hours that men and women and children could work. Chartist movement calling for other reforms in the government, such as suffrage and the end to the secret ballot, and women's right to vote. Corn Laws were repealed that taxed imported corn, that placed high in taxes on imported corn, so that Britain could better feed its population. A Reform Bill of 1867, which gave working class men the right to vote. These were some major British reforms that were passed. Queen Victoria was the longest serving queen up until the time of current Queen Elizabeth II. Because her reign was the longest and lasted between 1837 and January of 01. Thus, it became known as the Victorian era. She had a certain moral leadership qualities, and it did support quite a few of the reforms that were going on. So she didn't interfere very often. Prime ministers had a lot of control. Disraeli was a conservative two-time prime minister focused on foreign affairs, gaining the Suez Canal in Egypt, India as a colony, which they would have until 1947, for example. Gladstone was a liberal two-term party prime minister focused on domestic and financial affairs. His reforms, the Education Act, which required school children up to age 10 to have schooling, secret ballot, which the Chartists had pushed for, Reform Bill, which gave another Reform Bill, which gave farmers the right to vote, and a big one, urging home rule, although this wasn't successful initially, urging home rule for Ireland, meaning Ireland should be independent of Britain, which after a war in the 1900s they would be. So those were the big reforms under Gladstone, and some of the major reforms to take place in Great Britain during this time. Remember that, especially to close it down, that Queen Victoria really helped oversee a lot of this. I can't emphasize that enough. She was her support and her her moral compass and her sense of right and wrong really kind of helped Britain, especially in the areas of the crime and punishment and some of the reforms of the working class people. Were important. She didn't necessarily push for women's right to vote, though, but that would eventually come.